Night had settled over Gray Harbor and the whole city looked tired, cold, and half-broken. Tall towers leaned over narrow streets, skybridges cut across the dark like thin steel bones, and distant lightning flashed behind the harbor clouds. People moved fast under wet lamps because everyone in Gray Harbor knew that bad news traveled quicker than the wind. At the center of that fear stood Kael, a man with black hair, sharp eyes, and a habit of walking like trouble already belonged to him. He was a rogue hunter who worked for money, survival, and nothing else, and he carried shadow in his hands like other men carried knives. On this night, he was hired by Mara, a woman with red hair, a calm face, and a voice that never wasted a word. Mara was a fixer for desperate clients, and she wanted Kael for one job: only recover the Frost Relic before Victor got it. Victor was a pale man with white hair, expensive gloves, and a mind that loved control more than truth. He led a faction of relic traders, and he wanted the relic because it could freeze an entire continent in endless winter, then let him rule over whoever survived. That was the real danger, and Kael understood it from the start, even if he pretended not to care. If Victor won, cities would starve, roads would vanish, trade would fail, and the whole world might lock under a cold so deep that no army could cross it. Kael listened, looked at Mara, and asked the only question that mattered: how much? Mara answered, and the amount was enough to make him grin. She also gave him one warning. The relic was buried in the old crown tower where 3 groups were already moving in the dark. The city guard wanted to seal the area. Victor wanted the relic for power, and a 3rd group of mercenaries wanted it simply because chaos always paid well. Kael accepted the job not because he cared about Gray Harbor, but because he trusted his own hunger more than anyone else. Yet as he stepped into the rain, the storm currents around his shoulders began to hum, and the shadow under his feet seemed to lean toward the tower as if it already knew his name. Kael moved through the lower district first, where broken signs swung above flooded alleys and every window looked like an eye. He kept to the dark, and when 2 mercenaries blocked his path, he shaped the shadow from the wall into twin black blades. The blades were not metal, but they cut the air with a clean, silent threat that made both men step back at once. One reached for a gun, but Kael snapped his fingers, and a violent storm current burst from his palm, slamming the weapon away and driving both men into a heap of crates. He did not stay to finish the fight because Kael never wasted motion when speed would do. He climbed a rusted ladder, crossed a narrow roof, and reached the first skybridge that led toward Crown Tower. Below him, Gray Harbor was already changing into a battlefield. Guards were blocking roads, mercenaries were breaking through side streets. Victor had paid for confusion because confusion made people move where he wanted them to move. That was when Kael met Jace, a city guard captain with brown hair, tired eyes, and a stubborn sense of duty. Jace wanted the relic sealed away, and he believed Kael was just another thief making the city worse. Kael did not like Jace, but he understood him. Jace was trying to protect people who would never know his name. Before they could argue longer, arrows of light from mercenary rifles struck the bridge rail beside them, and both men had to dive behind broken stone. On the far side of the bridge stood Raven, a woman with black hair, a long coat, and a smile that never reached her eyes. She was Victor's main hunter, and she wanted Kael alive because Victor had ordered it. Raven shouted that Kael could still walk away with money if he handed over the route to the relic. Kael answered by pulling a long shadow blade from the air and forcing the first wave of attackers back. The bridge shook, glass cracked under their boots. Wind screamed through the gaps. Kael and Jace were forced into a short, tense alliance, and together they crossed the bridge under flying sparks and hard rain. Yet Kael noticed something strange as he fought. The closer he got to Crown Tower, the colder the shadow around him became, as if the relic was already pulling at his power from far away. Crown Tower stood in the center of the ruined upper city like a dead king still wearing his crown. Its top floors had collapsed long ago, leaving open rooms, broken stairs, and hanging beams that swayed over the storm. Kael and Jace entered through a shattered archway where frost already coated the stone even though the air outside was wet and warm. That meant the relic was awake. It also meant the tower had become a trap. Inside, they found bodies of shattered furniture, broken lanterns, and signs of a struggle that had happened only minutes before. Mara appeared again from a side hall, and this time her calm face was gone. She looked tense and she told Kael the truth at last. She had not hired him only for money. She had hired him because Victor had once worked with her family, used them to map the relic chambers, and then ruined them when he learned the relic could answer only to a person willing to embrace fear. Mara wanted Victor stopped, but she also feared the relic because old records said it could feed on the coldest part of a person and turn that fear into power. That was why the relic mattered so much. It did not just freeze land. It changed people, and those who held it too long began to think like winter itself, quiet and cruel and endless. Kael heard all this, and for the first time he did not answer with a joke. Instead, he asked why the relic had chosen this tower. Mara pointed to the central chamber below them where ancient runes still glowed under the ice. The tower had been built around a prison, not a vault. Long ago, the relic had been sealed here because no kingdom could destroy it safely. Kael realized the terrible truth at once. Victor did not just want the relic. He wanted to wake it completely, then use its cold to crush every rival city while his own people stayed safe behind walls of ice. That was the twist hidden inside the job, and it turned the whole chase into something worse. It was no longer about a theft. It was about preventing a catastrophe. Before Kael could speak, Raven crashed through the hall with mercenaries behind her, and the tower exploded into motion. Walls split, snow burst from cracks in the floor. The relic was waking fully, and everyone in the tower had to fight or flee. The battle pushed upward through broken staircases and open chambers where thunder flashed through the missing walls. Kael fought in the middle of it all, and his shadow blades moved like black fish through storm water, cutting ropes, breaking shields, and forcing enemies to retreat. He used storm currents to blast open blocked doors, jump impossible gaps, and hurl attackers off balance without ever needing to slow down. Jace fought beside him with hard discipline, using his shield to hold back the worst pressure, while Mara searched the upper chamber for the relic control seal hidden in the old stone. Victor finally arrived at the top through a lift of frozen chains, and he looked calm, which made him more dangerous. White frost crawled over his gloves, and his eyes were fixed on the chamber door like a man staring at a throne he believed was already his. Victor told Kael that the world needed order, and that fear was the only thing strong enough to bring it. He said the continent would be safer under his rule, even if it had to sleep in ice. Kael laughed once, but there was no humor in it. He had met men like Victor before, men who called cruelty a plan because they feared losing control. Victor then revealed his final move. He had not only wanted the relic. He had arranged the city war so the guard, the mercenaries, and every desperate thief would tear each other apart while he walked through the ruins untouched. That was why so many people had been pulled into the fight. Victor wanted Grey Harbor week before winter came. The relic chamber then opened, and a column of pale light rose from the floor as the frost relic emerged from its seal, wrapped in spinning ice rings and deep blue runes. Kael felt its pull at once, stronger than any gold or threat, because the relic spoke to the part of him that loved distance, silence, and power without mercy. For one dark moment, he imagined what it would feel like to command that cold and never fear another man again. That was the real danger, and Kael knew it. The relic was not only in the chamber, it was already inside the choices of everyone who stood there. Victor reached for it. Mara shouted for Kael to destroy it. Jace held the line against the last mercenaries, and Kael, standing in the storm of ice and thunder, had to choose what kind of monster he would become next. The chamber shook harder, the sky flashed white, and the relic answered by freezing the air around them, just as the first true winter of the night began to spread. The wind outside Grey Harbor screamed through broken streets, and cold rain struck the stone like handfuls of glass. Above the ruined city, Crown Tower leaned under storm clouds, its shattered upper rooms flashing white each time lightning cut across the sky. Inside the tower chamber, the air had already begun to freeze, and every breath came out like pale smoke. Kael stood in the center of that cold, with black hair falling over sharp gray eyes, his dark hooded coat wet at the edges, his leather armor tight against his lean frame. He did not look surprised anymore. He looked ready. Around him, Mara watched with red hair tied back and her pale face hard with focus, while Jace, broad-shouldered and tired, pressed his heavy shield into the cracked floor and held the last mercenaries back from the doorway. Victor stood closest to the relic, white hair shining under the blue glow, his silver-trimmed coat spotless even in the storm, and his cold eyes fixed on the crystal core as if it already belonged to him. Raven, slim and tense in her long black coat, waited near the broken stairs with a cruel half-smile, ready to strike if the moment turned in her favor. The frost relic floated between them all, wrapped in ice rings and blue runes, and it was more than an object now. It was a threat, a promise, and a test. If Victor took control of it, Grey Harbor would be buried under an endless winter, the coast would vanish under ice, and every district beyond the tower would become a dead white plain. Mara had said to destroy it. Victor had said to claim it. Kael had said nothing because he could feel the truth in the cold, and the truth was that the relic was already reaching into their choices and twisting them one by one. Victor moved first. He raised one gloved hand toward the relic, and the ice rings around the core turned faster as if they recognized him. His voice stayed calm, almost gentle, and that made him more dangerous than any shout. He said that the world had already failed, that weak rulers had left the coast in ruins, and that only someone with discipline could use the relic before it spread chaos across the whole continent. He spoke like a man making a law, not a man making a theft. He wanted order, but his order meant control, and his control meant everyone else would kneel. Mara stepped forward at once, her posture low and sharp, and she told Kael that Victor would never stop once he had the core. She had spent weeks tracing the old records in hidden rooms below the city, and she knew the relic had been sealed for a reason. Long ago, the first winter curse had nearly swallowed the harbor, and the only way the elders had trapped it was by locking the relic inside the tower and binding it with ancient runes. The seal was not just a door, it was a warning. If the relic woke fully, it would not stop at Grey Harbor. It would spread through rivers, roads, and trade routes until whole regions froze under a sky that never warmed again. Jace grunted as another wave of mercenaries pushed in from the hall. He drove them back with his shield, boots grinding on ice that was already forming under him, and he told Kael to choose fast because he could not hold the line forever. Kael heard all of it, but he also heard the relic, a low cold hum that seemed to answer the fear in every heart around it. It was showing them what they wanted most, then offering it back with a price. Then the room changed. The relic pulsed once, and the blue runes flared so bright that everyone had to shield their eyes. Frost raced over the floor in thin white veins, crawling toward the walls and climbing the broken beams overhead. The chamber shook again, and stone dust fell from the ceiling in small, sharp bursts. Mara shouted for Kael to destroy it before Victor could touch it, but Victor smiled for the first time because he saw hesitation in Kael and believed he could use it. That was the twist hiding inside the battle, the one Victor had counted on. He had not come only to seize the relic. He had come to push Kael into the act that would make everyone else fear him. Victor wanted a monster on the board because monsters were easier to blame, and blame made it easier for him to rule the aftermath. He had even used Raven to spread false stories through the lower city, telling frightened people that Kael already worked for the relic, that Kael was the one who had brought the winter to Grey Harbor. Kael felt the lie hit harder than the cold. He had spent too long trying to carry dangerous power without becoming cruel, and now Victor was trying to turn that struggle into proof of guilt. Raven laughed softly from the stairs, her black eyes narrow, and she said she only followed the strongest path, which meant she would stand beside whoever won. Then she moved in a blur, cutting across the chamber toward Mara. Jace slammed his shield into the nearest mercenary and forced him back, but another two slipped around him and the doorway was almost lost. Kael finally moved. Shadows poured from under his boots and rose around his arms like living smoke, turning into dark blades that hummed with storm energy. He caught Raven before she reached Mara, and the clash of shadow and steel sent sparks and ice dust into the air. Yet Kael did not strike to finish her. He only forced her away because he was still deciding what kind of power he would use, and that single choice mattered more than any blow. Mara saw the opening and ran to the lowest rune circle at the far side of the chamber. She had found it earlier while Victor was busy pretending to negotiate, and she knew the seal could be weakened if all 4 rune marks were lit at once. She called to Kael that the tower was built to answer more than one hand, and that the relic could not be broken by force alone. It had to be turned against itself. That was the second secret, and it changed everything. The Frost Relic was not only a prison, it was also a key. It had been made by old tower keepers who feared a greater void under the coast, something they called the deep cold, a hunger that slept beneath the sea cliffs and fed on fear, hunger, and control. The relic had been used to hold that force down, but if someone with a selfish heart commanded it, the deep cold would wake and use the relic as a door. Victor had never cared about that warning. He only wanted the power on the other side. He reached the relic at last, fingers inches from the glowing core, and the chamber answered with a blast of freezing wind that threw loose beams from the ceiling. Jace shouted for everyone to get down as part of the upper wall collapsed, cutting off the mercenaries behind him. For one hard moment, it looked as if Victor had already won. Then Kael did the one thing Victor had not planned for. He stopped fighting the tower and started listening to it. The storm currents around Kael changed shape, no longer wild and sharp but steady and clear, and his shadow blades sank into the floor runes one by one. The chamber lit up under his feet and the broken seal began to awaken. The tower roared as the ancient runes pulled cold light from the relic and sent it through the stone. Victor stepped back, and for the first time fear crossed his face. He understood then that Kael was not trying to destroy the relic by brute force. He was using the tower itself to lock the core in place long enough to force a choice between control and surrender. Mara kept the rune circle alive with shaking hands, red hair whipping across her face as the wind rose, and she shouted the final step to Kael just as Raven lunged again from the side. Jace saw her move, lowered his shoulder, and drove her away from Mara with a hard shield strike that sent her sliding across the frozen floor. No one was killed, no one was broken beyond return, but every clash pushed them closer to the edge. Kael lifted both hands, storm energy twisting between his fingers, and the relic answered with a wave of ice so cold that the whole chamber went silent for one breath. Then Kael changed his mind. He did not try to own the relic. He did not try to crush it. He opened the shadow blades into a circle and fed his storm power into the seal, accepting the pain, the chill, and the risk, because he understood at last that true strength was not the power to take. True strength was the power to hold back. The runes burned white, the relic screamed without a mouth. Victor was driven backward, his silver coat whipped by the blast, and his cold blue eyes widened in shock as the core began to split its light into the 4 rune marks. The first true winter outside the tower hit its peak, and every window in Crown Tower flashed white at once. Then, just as the chamber seemed ready to break, the floor beneath Victor opened with a deep cracking sound, and a hidden stairway appeared below the relic pedestal. Mara stared at it in disbelief because nothing in her records mentioned a lower vault. Kael, breathing hard, saw one thing only. The tower had not been hiding a prison. It had been hiding a deeper lock. And if there was another lock under Grey Harbor, then something even worse had been waiting there this whole time. Victor smiled again, but now it was not a confident smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally found the door he had been searching for. He looked at Kael and said the real game had only just begun. The chamber kept shaking, the ice kept spreading, and the newly opened stairway called to them with a cold that felt older than the storm above. Kael stood at the edge of that darkness, no longer the same man who had hesitated at the start of the night, and he knew that the next choice would matter even more than the last. But before he could move, a low sound rose from below, deep and slow, like something waking up after a very long sleep. Grey Harbor looked like a city that had been left out in a storm for years. Broken towers leaned over wet streets, narrow alleys held deep pools of black water, and the tall skybridges between the upper districts groaned under wind and thunder. Above it all stood Crown Tower, a shattered old fortress of dark stone where ancient runes slept under layers of dust, rain, and cold. Inside that tower, far below the broken stairs and hanging beams, Kael, Mara, Jace, Victor, and Raven stood at the edge of a new darkness while the frost relic pushed its freezing mist through the stone. Everyone knew the danger now. If the relic fully woke, the whole coast could be locked in endless frost, and Grey Harbor would become a city of ice and silence. Kael was the first to move, but not because he felt brave. He moved because the sound from below rose again, low and slow, like something huge turning in its sleep. Kael was a man with black hair, sharp gray eyes, and a lean, athletic build, and he carried himself with a dangerous calm that only came after too much pain and too many hard choices. He wore a dark hooded coat, layered leather armor, fingerless gloves, and boots made for fast movement, and shadow already curled around his hands like it was waiting for his command. Beside him, Mara stood steady in her fitted dark long coat, her red hair tied back tight, her pale face focused and tense, with utility belts, slim gloves, and practical boots ready for a quick escape or a quick fight. Jace was the broad one, a city guard captain with brown hair, weathered skin, dark armor plates, a heavy shield, reinforced boots, and the tired face of a man who had spent years trying to protect a city that never thanked him. Victor watched them all with cold blue eyes, his white hair neat, his expensive silver-trimmed coat untouched by the frost, and his dark gloves folded behind his back like he was already certain the night belonged to him. Raven stood near him like a blade in human form, a woman with black hair, sharp eyes, a long black coat, fitted tactical armor, dark gloves, and high boots, wearing a cruel half-smile that said she enjoyed fear more than victory. Victor spoke first, and his voice was calm enough to be worse than a shout. He said the sound below was not a monster waking up, but the guardian of the relic, the final lock that kept the frost relic from ever reaching the world above. He said the city had been weak for too long, divided by fear, greed, and lies, and that the relic could end all of that by forcing everyone to face one simple truth, which was that only strong hands could hold a broken world together. Jace stepped forward at once and told him that control through fear was still cruelty, no matter how polished the speech sounded. Mara looked from the stairway to the spreading ice and said that the chamber was losing heat too fast, which meant they had minutes, not hours, before the lower seals could crack wider. Kael understood then that this was not only a battle for a relic, it was a battle over what kind of future people should be forced to live in. Then Raven moved. She did not rush in wildly because she was too skilled for that. She slipped across the broken floor with the smooth steps of a hunter, her body low and balanced, and a dark blade flashed in her hand as she tried to drive Kael away from the stairway. Kael answered by throwing up a wall of living shadow, and the dark shape broke her first strike just long enough for him to push her back with a burst of storm wind from his hands. The air snapped with cold force, loose dust spun into the air, and cracked stone rattled under their feet. Raven smiled as she slid away and said Kael was finally learning, which made him dangerous enough to matter. Jace raised his shield and forced Victor to retreat half a step when more ice burst across the floor, and Mara hurled a small crystal charge to break a frozen ridge before it boxed them in. The chamber became a tight storm of motion, light, and pressure, with each person trying to control a space that kept shrinking. Then the first real revelation hit like a hard to the mind. Victor finally admitted that the frost relic had not been found by chance. He had come to Crown Tower years ago with his own expedition, because his family records had spoken of a buried seal beneath Grey Harbor, one that could either protect the coast or punish every city that had ever tried to rule by fear. He had spent years studying old maps and hidden runes, and he had learned that the relic did not simply freeze water. It fed on panic, confusion, and division. The more people fought each other around it, the stronger it became. That was why he had let rumors spread, why he had lured treasure hunters into the tower, and why he had pushed so many small conflicts until tonight. He did not want the relic because he believed in mercy. He wanted it because he believed a frightened world could be shaped into obedience, and he thought only he was smart enough to hold that power without being consumed by it. Mara understood the trap at once, and her sharp face turned even harder. If the relic grew through fear, then every clash inside the tower was feeding it, which meant Victor had planned this place like a machine built to make people panic. Kael looked at the stairway again, and now he saw faint blue runes circling the opening below, with ice crawling over each mark like veins under skin. The low sound from beneath rolled up again, and this time the floor answered with a deep shiver. A loose beam dropped from above and split across the stone, and the frost mist thickened until everyone could see their own breath shining in front of them. Jace cursed under his breath and said the city guards outside would never hold if this spread any further. He had come here to save Grey Harbor, but now he saw the truth, which was that if the relic fully opened, no wall and no shield could stop the cold from swallowing the streets. Kael took one step toward the stairway, and Victor finally lost some of his calm. He warned Kael that the path below was sealed for a reason, and that the thing waking under the tower was old enough to erase anyone foolish enough to challenge it. Raven added that the Guardian was not sleeping in the normal way. It was bound to the relic, and if the seal broke, the force below would not just attack, it would spread. That was the second part of the truth, and it mattered more than the first. The lower power was not a single beast waiting in one room. It was a cold current tied to the relic itself, a deep ancient force made to flood the city if the seal failed. Kael had to make a choice fast, because the chamber was already splitting along the floor and the blue light was climbing the walls like frost with a mind of its own. Kael did not choose retreat. He had spent too much of his life backing away from pain, and every step had only given fear more room. He turned to Mara and asked if she could read the runes below fast enough to find the seal point. Mara answered without looking away from the stairway that she could, but only if someone kept Victor and Raven busy long enough for her to work. Jace slammed his shield down and said he would hold the upper floor, even if it meant standing alone for a little while. That was the moment Kael changed for real, because he did not argue and he did not hesitate. He nodded once, trusted the plan, and trusted the people beside him. Then he reached down into the dark around his hands and shaped it into two sharp shadow blades, while storm currents circled his wrists like restless dogs. He was no longer thinking only about surviving the night. He was thinking about who he was willing to become for the sake of others. Victor saw that change, and for the first time his cold control cracked into something close to anger. He said Kael was wasting power on loyalty, when loyalty never held a kingdom together for long. Kael answered that a kingdom built on fear was already broken, and that people were not tools to be arranged like pieces on a board. The words landed harder than any strike because Victor had no quick answer for them. He had built his whole life around the idea that order mattered more than trust, and he truly believed that harsh control was the only thing that kept the weak from tearing each other apart. That was why he had become dangerous. Not because he loved chaos, but because he feared it so deeply that he was willing to freeze the world to stop it. And that fear made him blind to the simple truth standing right in front of him. Mara reached the first ring of runes at the stairwell and pressed her hand to the stone. The symbols flashed once, then twice, and she called out that the seal was still partly intact, but only because something below was holding it shut from the other side. That changed everything. The Guardian was not just waking up, it was struggling to keep the relic from breaking free. Kael heard that and felt the shape of the problem shift in his mind. This was not a simple enemy waiting to be destroyed. This was a prison built by desperate hands long ago, and whatever lived below had been trapped for a reason that might not be evil at all. Before he could answer, the stairway exhaled a blast of bitter cold, and a great shape moved somewhere in the dark beneath the steps. Not fully seen, not fully named, but enormous enough to make the whole tower tremble. Raven looked into that opening, and even her cruel smile faded for a moment. She had expected a prize, a weapon, maybe a secret power she could claim for Victor, but now she saw a deeper danger that did not care about loyalty or greed. Jace shouted for everyone to brace as the floor split wider, and a surge of ice crawled across the chamber in fast white lines. Victor lifted one hand and said they had gone too far to turn back. He was right about that much. The real game had indeed only just begun, and the next move would decide whether Grey Harbor was saved, ruled, or frozen into a silent ruin. Kael tightened his grip on the shadow blades, Mara kept one hand on the runes, Jace held the line above, Raven hovered at the edge of the dark with dangerous patience, and from below came another slow sound, larger now, like a sealed heart beating against the walls of the world. Kael stared into the stairway and stepped forward into the cold, ready to find out what was waiting beneath Crown Tower, while the tower itself groaned as if it knew the answer would change everything. Air poured up from the stairway, and it carried the smell of wet stone, old iron, and deep magic that had slept too long. Grey Harbor sat above them like a wounded city, with broken towers, slick streets, and storm clouds pressing low over the sea. Inside Crown Tower, the upper floors had already fallen into ruin, yet the lower chambers still held power, and that power had now begun to wake. Kael stood at the edge of the stairwell with black hair falling into his sharp gray eyes, his lean body tense beneath a dark hooded coat and layered leather armor. He was the kind of man who looked calm only because he had already decided to keep moving. Mara stood close behind him, a woman with red hair, pale skin, and a focused face, her fitted dark coat and slim gloves ready for a fight she did not want to lose. Jace was above them in the broken chamber, a broad man with brown hair and the heavy guard armor of a captain who had spent too many nights defending a city that no longer listened. Raven waited at the dark edge nearby, a woman with black hair, a long black coat, and a cruel half-smile that made every warning in her eyes seem more dangerous. They had come to Crown Tower because the frost relic was somewhere below, hidden in the oldest sealed floor, and if it awakened fully, its cold could spread far beyond Grey Harbor and lock the coast in endless winter. That was the first truth, and it was terrible enough, but there was another truth even worse. Victor had been hunting the relic for months, not to destroy it, but to claim it, because he believed fear was the only language strong enough to hold the world together. The tower groaned again, as if it understood that the people standing inside it were about to uncover a secret that could break the balance of the whole region. He stepped down first, and the stairway swallowed his boots in silence. The broken steps were narrow, the walls closed, and the carved runes along the stone gave off a pale blue glow that pulsed like a tired heartbeat. Mara touched the nearest rune with careful fingers, and her eyes narrowed as she read the old pattern. The seal was not simple. It had been made in layers, with one lock meant to hold the frost relic and another lock meant to hide the reason it had ever been buried here. That detail changed the shape of the danger at once, because a hidden seal always meant someone had been afraid of the truth inside. Jace called down from above, his voice steady but strained, saying that the outer chamber behind them was still clear. but the tower was shaking more with each slow beat from below. He could not leave his post because if enemies came through the upper ruins, they would have no warning. Raven listened from the dark, one hand on the hilt at her side, and she admitted in a low voice that Victor had sent her only to watch, not to help. She had not told him that she wanted more than gold or rank. She wanted the proof that Victor could be beaten because she had seen too many people bow to him out of fear. Kael did not trust her, but he understood her kind of hunger, and that made her useful for the moment. Then the next chamber opened beneath them, and the cold became so sharp that even their breath seemed to stiffen in the air. In the center of the room, floating above a broken stone pedestal, hovered the Frost Relic, a glowing crystal core wrapped in thin ice rings and blue runes. It cast a pale light over the chamber, and every stone around it was coated in frost. The relic was beautiful in a dangerous way, like a blade wrapped in snow, and its slow pulse told them it was not sleeping anymore. Mara whispered that the runes were active, and Kael felt the storm current in his hands answer the relic with a restless flicker. The relic was drawing power from the tower, and the tower was feeding on the fear of anyone who entered. That was when the first true surprise came. The chamber door behind them sealed itself with a hard slam, and from the shadowed archway on the far side, Victor stepped into view. Victor looked exactly like the kind of man who believed the world should obey his voice. His white hair was neat, his pale skin seemed almost cold enough to match the chamber, and his blue eyes were calm in a way that felt far more dangerous than anger. He wore an expensive silver-trimmed coat, dark formal gloves, and tall boots polished for a ruler rather than a fighter. He did not rush, and he did not sneer. He simply watched the relic, then watched Kael as if both of them were already part of a plan that had been moving for years. He said that the Frost Relic was never meant to stay buried, because the old council had hidden it in panic, and panic had almost destroyed Grey Harbor in the past. He claimed he had found records in the city vaults, records that showed the relic could stabilize the weather if it was controlled with discipline and constant guarding. He said the coast needed order, not brave guesses and broken promises. Kael answered with a hard stare and asked why, if Victor wanted safety, he had sent Raven, hidden agents, and city pressure to force everyone toward the tower like pawns. Victor did not deny it. He explained his motive with smooth certainty, saying that people only unite when they are afraid to stand alone, and that he would rather be hated for control than loved for weakness. That answer made the room colder than the relic itself because it showed he did not see people as partners. He saw them as tools. Mara shifted closer to Kael, reading the room faster than anyone else, and she noticed that Victor was not standing between them and the relic by accident. He had come here because the relic was already changing, and he wanted to claim it before the chamber fully opened. The old seal had not only hidden power, it had been built to prevent someone like Victor from reaching the relic at the wrong time. That was the second truth, and it made the danger far greater. If the relic woke without the right balance, its frost could spread through the tower, then through the harbor, then across the entire coast. Victor believed he could guide that power. The others believed his control would simply become another cage. The chamber began to shake before anyone could speak again. Thin cracks spread across the floor around the pedestal, and the blue runes brightened until the whole room looked lit by icy fire. Mara moved first, pressing both hands to the nearest stone line and speaking the old sealing words she had studied above ground. Her voice stayed calm, but her shoulders were tight because she knew the seal was already failing. Jace shouted from the upper landing that the tower was shifting, and dust rained down through the broken beams. He had begun moving toward the stairwell now because he could feel the structure turning unstable. Raven took 2 quick steps back into the shadow, not from fear but from instinct, because she had seen enough traps to know when a room was about to turn. Kael raised one hand and pulled shadow into long dark blades while storm currents snapped around his fingers in bright, dangerous arcs. Victor lifted a gloved hand and released a cold pulse of force that struck the relic and made it spin faster, proving at once that he could touch its power but not fully command it. For one sharp moment, everyone understood the same thing. Victor had not come to save the tower. He had come to claim the relic before anyone else could stop him, even if the chamber broke apart in the process. Kael lunged forward and his shadow blades clashed against Victor as the storm in his hands slammed into the freezing air. The impact sent a hard wave through the room, and the pedestal split with a loud crack. Mara saw the runes on the floor rearrange themselves into a pattern she had never expected, and the shape of that pattern revealed the hidden truth of the seal. The frost relic had not been buried only to protect the world from it. It had been buried because it was once tied to Victor's family line, and the old council had locked it away after one of his ancestors tried to use it as a throne for the whole coast. That revelation hit like a blade of understanding. Victor was not chasing a random weapon, he was chasing a legacy. He wanted to restore a power his family had lost, and he believed that was his right. The relic responded to his blood with a sharp flash of ice, and the chamber filled with a sound like a giant bell struck under frozen water. Kael staggered, then forced himself upright because he finally understood the shape of the battle. They were not just fighting for a relic. They were fighting a man who thought the world should belong to the strongest heir. Mara shouted for Kael to get clear of the pedestal because the seal was about to split into pieces. Jace reached the doorway above and dropped his shield into place just as a wave of cold rushed up the stairwell, forcing the tower guards in the upper ruin to retreat. Raven moved through the side dark and cut the support rope of a hanging beam, not to harm anyone, but to stop Victor from using the beam as cover. It crashed across part of the chamber and blocked his next step. Victor did not panic, he only adjusted because he believed every problem could be bent if enough pressure was used. He told Kael that the relic would destroy Grey Harbor if left in the wrong hands, and that the wrong hands were not his. Kael answered without raising his voice, saying that power without trust only made new ruins. That was the first time Victor looked annoyed, and it mattered because it meant Kael had touched the one idea Victor did not know how to accept. Trust was not weakness here, it was the only thing keeping the world from becoming a cage. Mara then completed the next part of the seal, but she did it with a twist no one expected. She did not try to lock the relic tighter. She loosened one hidden ring, enough to lower the pressure and keep the chamber from shattering. The rune pattern shifted, and the frost relic calmed just enough for everyone to breathe again. That move saved them all from being overwhelmed, but it also opened a narrow path deeper below the tower, a passage none of the old maps had shown. The final surprise landed in that quiet moment. A second chamber lay beneath them, and from its open crack came a voice, low and ancient, speaking Victor's family name as if it had been waiting a very long time. Victor turned toward it, and for the first time his perfect control slipped. He knew that voice. He knew who was below. Kael saw that fear in his face and understood that the hidden chamber did not hold an empty secret. It held the reason Victor had been afraid to let anyone else come this far. The tower shook again, the frost light dimmed, and the new passage opened wider while the team stood on the edge of a deeper truth that would change everything in the next descent. The air inside Crown Tower was thin, cold, and hard to breathe, and the broken stone around the team carried old frost that seemed to glow from within. Grey Harbor lay far below them, hidden under storm clouds and distant lightning, while the tower above groaned like a giant ship under strain. Kael stood with his dark hood pulled low, his black hair damp with icy mist, and his sharp gray eyes locked on the passage that had just opened. Mara stood beside him, a woman with red hair and a focused face, her calm posture hiding the tension in every line of her body. Jace, a broad man with brown hair and a captain uniform worn by duty, kept one hand near his shield and watched the dark opening with a tired, careful stare. Raven, a slim woman with black hair and a cruel half-smile, leaned back with quiet confidence, as if danger was only another thing she enjoyed. Victor, the white-haired man in the silver-trimmed coat, looked pale and stiff, and for the first time his perfect control was cracked. The reason was simple now, and it mattered to all of them. Someone below had spoken to him, and Victor knew that voice. Kael understood then that this was not just a relic hunt. This was a secret buried for years, and if it came loose now, it could shake the whole coast apart. Victor did not speak at first, and that silence told Kael more than any speech could have done. The man who always moved like a ruler now looked like someone standing on the edge of a lost memory. He turned his face partly away from the others, as if he could hide the fear by hiding his eyes. But Kael saw enough. Victor had not only been protecting the Frost Relic, and he had not only been guiding them through the tower for power. He had come here because this place was tied to his past, and the voice below was tied to that past even more tightly. Mara noticed it too, and she gave Kael a small side glance that said she was already planning for the worst. Jace tightened his grip on his shield because he had seen enough city corruption to know that when a powerful man loses control, everyone nearby can suffer for it. Raven only smiled more because fear in another person always made her feel stronger. The tower shook again, dust drifted from the beams, and the frost light dimmed to a weak blue pulse. Then the opening below widened with a long, grinding groan, as if the ancient stone itself had made the choice for them. Kael felt the storm energy gather in his hands, not because he wanted a fight, but because his body knew this descent might end in one. Victor finally spoke, and his voice was quiet, clipped, and far less sure than before. He said that the chamber below held a prisoner from his own work, someone he had once trusted and someone who had seen too much. That single truth changed the shape of everything around them. Kael had expected a hidden weapon, or a locked vault, or even a monster chained beneath the tower. Instead, the enemy was closer and more human than that. Victor had not built this place only to guard the Frost Relic. He had hidden part of the truth because the Frost Relic did not merely freeze the world around it. It also woke old memory paths in the ancient stones, and those stones could hold voices, echoes, and even living witnesses inside sealed places for a very long time. That meant the person below might know how Victor found the relic, how he used it, and why Grey Harbor had started freezing in strange patches long before anyone noticed the pattern. Kael listened carefully because now the stakes were plain. If the prisoner was freed, the truth might destroy Victor and expose a wider danger. If the prisoner stayed trapped, the Frost Relic might keep spreading its cold through the coast until the city became a grave of ice and silence. Mara asked the question everyone feared. Was the person below a witness, or was the person below the one who started this whole disaster? Victor did not answer directly, and that was answer enough to deepen the fear. They moved down together, but the descent was anything but calm. Broken stairs led into a narrow shaft where the air grew colder with each step, and the blue runes on the walls flashed in uneven pulses as if they were waking from sleep. Kael went first, his shadow blades forming thin dark lines beside his hands, while storm currents stirred around his gloves in low, controlled bursts. Mara followed closely, checking the walls and floor with sharp eyes, always ready to spot a trap before it could close on them. Jace kept the middle position, using his shield to guard the others from falling stone and sudden blasts of cold. Raven stayed near the rear, her black coat brushing the steps as she moved with a hunter-like grace, and her gaze kept sliding between Victor and the passage ahead. Victor himself walked with measured steps, but the crack in his control never fully healed. That mattered because every time the floor trembled, he looked a little more haunted. The deeper they went, the more the tower changed around them. The walls shifted from rough stone to older blocks carved with thin, sealed symbols. The symbols were not random decoration. They were warning marks meant to keep something contained. Kael realized that the tower had not been built simply on old ruins. It had been built around a buried prison. Then a faint sound drifted up through the cold, and it was not the roar of magic or the groan of stone. It was a human voice, weak but clear, calling Victor by name. Victor stopped so suddenly that Jace nearly bumped into him. For a moment the whole group froze, and the silence around them felt heavier than the frost. The voice below called again, and this time it carried pain, anger, and deep recognition. It was a woman. Kael saw Victor close his eyes for one brief second, as if the sound had struck him in the chest. Then the truth became sharper. The prisoner was not some random guard and not a forgotten thief. She was someone who had once stood beside Victor when the relic was first uncovered. That was the twist that changed the meaning of the whole descent. Victor had not been the only one involved in the original secret. He had betrayed a partner, locked her away, and continued rising in power while she stayed buried under the tower with only the Frost Relic light to keep her alive. Mara looked at Victor with open disgust now because the pattern was easy to read. He had built his rule on silence. He had protected himself by hiding the people who knew the truth. Jace, who still believed in duty, looked shaken by the scale of it. Raven, however, looked almost pleased because this kind of betrayal gave her leverage, and she loved leverage more than honesty. Victor tried to recover his old tone and said the woman below was dangerous, unstable, and tied to a curse that could not be allowed to spread. But Kael heard the flaw in his words. Victor was not afraid of a curse. He was afraid of being exposed. That difference mattered because now the team could see the real battle. It was no longer just about stopping the Frost Relic. It was about deciding whether Victor still had the right to lead them at all. Before anyone could answer, the tower gave a deep, violent shudder, and a crack split open along the wall beside them. Cold light poured from the gap, and from within it came a pulse so strong that all of them staggered. The Frost Relic was reacting to the prisoner below. Kael felt the storm in his hands flare, and he saw thin threads of ice race across the floor like living veins. Mara pulled Jace back from the edge before the broken stair could collapse under him. Raven moved with quick balance and almost vanished into the shadows, always safest when chaos made others careless. Victor raised one gloved hand, and for a second his old authority returned, but it was not enough to calm the relic. The cold kept growing, the blue runes along the walls brightened, then pulsed in a pattern that looked less like magic and more like a signal. Kael understood the danger at once. The woman below was not only trapped. She was somehow linked to the relic itself, and whatever bond held them together was waking up. The passage below opened wider, showing a deeper chamber with hanging chains, broken pillars, and a pale glow at the far end. Someone was waiting there, someone had been waiting a very long time. Kael stepped forward first because if Victor was too frightened to lead and too guilty to speak, then the truth would have to come from below. Behind him, Mara lowered her hand to her belt, Jace lifted his shield, Raven watched in silence, and Victor stood in the cold light like a man seeing the cost of every lie he had ever told. Then the team crossed the threshold, and the hidden chamber below Crown Tower began to reveal the next secret. The chamber below Crown Tower was cold enough to bite through leather and steel, and the air felt old enough to remember every secret that had ever been buried there. Gray Harbor above them still groaned under storm clouds, broken bridges, and leaning stone. But down here the world had narrowed to one room, one danger, and one truth that nobody wanted to face too quickly. Kael, a man with black hair, sharp gray eyes, and a lean, athletic build, stepped fully inside first, because he had learned that fear grew strongest when people waited too long. He wore a dark hooded coat, layered leather armor, fingerless gloves, and boots built for fast movement, and his calm face made him look more dangerous than loud men ever could. Mara followed close behind, a woman with red hair, pale skin, and a sharp, focused face, her fitted dark long coat and utility belts making her look ready for work instead of panic. Jace, a man with brown hair, weathered skin, and a broad, strong build, came next with his shield raised, his city guard armor scratched and heavy from too many hard nights. Raven, a woman with black hair, sharp eyes, and a slim, deadly posture, moved in silence at the rear, her long black coat and dark gloves making her feel like a shadow that had chosen a human shape. Victor, a man with white hair, pale skin, and cold blue eyes, entered last, and his expensive silver-trimmed coat looked almost insulting in a place like this, as if wealth itself had walked into a grave. None of them needed a reminder of the problem because the frost relic was still the heart of it all, and if it was ever set free, the coast could be locked in endless frost that would ruin farms, ports, homes, and every chance of a normal future. The chamber opened wider as they advanced, revealing dark stone walls covered in old runes, broken chains hanging from rusted hooks, and a circle of frozen dust at the center of the floor. At first, the room seemed empty, but then a pale blue glow began to pulse from a raised stone pedestal near the back wall. On top of it sat the frost relic, a glowing crystal core wrapped in floating ice rings and blue runes, its cold mist rolling across the floor like a living thing. Mara stopped at once and studied the room with careful eyes because she was not the kind of woman who trusted a first glance, and her red hair caught the cold light as she leaned forward to inspect the runes. She had spent years learning how traps, locks, and secret systems worked, and what mattered to her now was simple: who built this chamber, why they sealed the relic here, and what would happen if the seal failed. Jace planted his feet and scanned the walls because he wanted the team to survive this night, and because duty was the only thing that still held him upright after all the corruption he had seen in the city guard. Raven smirked faintly, but even her cruel half-smile looked tense now, because she could feel how wrong the room was and because she trusted danger more than she trusted people. Victor stared at the relic with a face made tight by shame, and the others could see that he already knew far more than he had admitted. Then Kael asked the question everyone had been avoiding, and his voice stayed steady while the storm currents began to gather faintly around his hands. He asked why Victor had brought them here and what he had hidden from them all this time. Victor did not answer at once, and that silence was worse than a shout. He stood under the cold light with his white hair glowing silver, and for a moment he looked less like a ruler and more like a man cornered by his own past. He finally admitted that the frost relic had not been found by accident in Gray Harbor, because it had been moved here long ago by the old city founders when they learned what it could do. The relic was not simply powerful, he said, but linked to a binding system buried through the tower and the harbor below, a system meant to keep the crystals sleeping forever. If the seal broke, he explained, the relic would not just freeze one room or one street, but would spread a continent-wide winter that could choke trade, trap ships in ice, and leave the whole coast helpless. That was why Victor had guarded the secret so tightly, and why he had lied, because he feared that greedy leaders, desperate nobles, or invading armies would use the relic as a weapon of control. He had kept the truth from the others because he believed that the fewer people who knew, the less chance there was of the relic falling into the wrong hands. Kael listened, but he did not forgive the lie just because the reason sounded logical. He knew fear could make a person hide useful truth, yet he also knew that secrets could rot trust from the inside. Mara asked the sharper question next, and she wanted to know why Victor had brought them here now after so many lies instead of leaving the chamber sealed. Victor lowered his gaze and said that the seal was failing, and he had heard the runes in the tower begin to crack during the last storm. He had come because he could no longer fix it alone, and because the chamber had begun to call to someone who had once been tied to it. That final part made the room feel colder still. Twist arrived, simple and cruel, and it changed everything in a single breath. The runes on the wall were not only a prison for the frost relic, but also a record of the person who had helped build the seal, and that name matched Victor exactly. Mara moved closer, tracing one line of ancient script with a gloved finger, and her face hardened as the truth became clear. Victor had not only hidden the relic from the city, but had also inherited the duty to guard it from his own family line, because his ancestors had once served the founders as keepers of the seal. That meant his lies were not just the work of a scared man, but the long habit of a family that had decided the truth was too dangerous for everyone else. Jace frowned, because it was one thing to hear that a man had made bad choices, and another to learn that those choices had been passed down like a dark family rule. Raven let out a low breath and said she finally understood why Victor always sounded so certain, because certainty was easier when a person had spent years building a wall around shame. Kael felt the shift in the room, and he also felt the first pulse of storm energy answering the cold from the relic. The crystal core brightened, and the floating ice rings turned a little faster, as if the relic had noticed the living people gathered around it. A deep sound moved through the floor, like stone waking under heavy pressure, and the chamber doors behind them began to seal with a grinding echo. That meant someone or something had triggered the chamber defense, and if the team did not act quickly, they would be trapped inside with the relic and its failing seal. Mara turned toward the door, Jace lifted his shield higher, Raven shifted her stance to strike, and Kael raised both hands as shadow gathered into thin, living blades at his fingers. These moments came fast and hard. Cracks of blue light raced across the runes, and cold mist spilled across the floor in thick waves, making every step feel uncertain. Kael moved first, not because he wanted to lead alone, but because he knew hesitation would let the chamber decide the battle for them. He sent one shadow blade out to strike a glowing rune near the ceiling, and the blade cut through the air with a sharp black flash, not to destroy the seal, but to break the pattern that was feeding the chamber alarm. Mara shouted for everyone to stay clear of the pedestal, because she had noticed the relic was pulling power from the broken stones around it. Jace planted his shield between the group and the widening glow as a burst of frozen force slammed forward, and the impact drove him back a half step, though he held his ground with stubborn strength. Raven darted to the side and pulled a hidden lever under a fallen beam, because she had found a manual control built into the old chamber wall, and her sharp eyes had caught what everyone else missed. The grinding sound stopped for 1/10 second, then began again, this time slower, as if the chamber had become confused. Victor stepped toward the pedestal at last, and the others looked at him with doubt, but he finally acted like the man who had brought them here. He reached into the cold mist and spoke to the relic in a low voice, using words that no one else understood, words passed down through his family as part of the sealing duty. The ice rings slowed, then trembled, then shifted into a new pattern that revealed a hidden map inside the blue runes. Everyone stared, because the relic was not merely bound to the chamber. It was also pointing toward a second seal somewhere below the harbor, a deeper lock that could either stabilize the frost or spread it far beyond Grey Harbor. First time since entering the chamber, Victor looked truly afraid, but it was not the fear of a liar being caught. It was the fear of a keeper who had just learned that the old builders had left the work unfinished. He admitted that the hidden seal below the harbor had never been opened by his family, because the last keeper had vanished before passing on the final instructions. That meant the team had been guarding the wrong layer of the problem, and the real danger was not just what was in Crown Tower, but what lay under the water and stone beyond it. Kael understood at once that this changed their path, because the relic was not simply a weapon to destroy, but a system that might need to be repaired before anyone could safely touch it. Mara straightened and began thinking in lines and steps again because she wanted answers that could be used, not just fears that could be felt. Jace asked the question every guard would ask, which was whether they could hold the line if the chamber failed completely, and Victor answered with a grim nod that said no one could promise that. Raven, still half in the shadows, looked at Victor with new interest because she could see the man was not hiding power now. He was hiding responsibility, and those two things could ruin a person in very different ways. Kael placed one hand near the relic, careful not to touch it yet, and he felt its cold pulse push against his storm energy like two forces arguing in the dark. He did not trust Victor, not fully, but he now understood the shape of the lie. Victor had hidden the truth because he believed truth in the wrong hands would become a disaster, and because he had spent his whole life trying to be the one person strong enough to carry the burden alone. That belief had failed him, and it had nearly failed everyone else. The team stood together in the cold chamber, with the relic glowing between them and the second seal waiting somewhere below the harbor, and Kael made the choice that would carry them into the next part of the story. He told the others that they were not leaving until they learned what the lower seal protected, because if the old keepers had left a deeper lock, then someone had a reason to fear what slept beneath Grey Harbor. The chamber lights flickered once, the ice rings began turning again, and the hidden map burned brighter, pointing them toward a danger none of them had yet seen. Harbor sat under a hard sky where storm clouds rolled low over broken towers and wet stone streets. The city had once been rich with ships, trade, and bright harbor lights, but now it looked like a place that had been held underwater by bad memories. Cold wind moved through the alleys, and every rooftop seemed to lean a little more with each passing hour. In the middle of that ruined place stood Crown Tower, black and wounded, with shattered stairs, open chambers, and ancient ruins locked deep inside its lower floors. Kael, the man with black hair and sharp gray eyes, stood near the flickering chamber lights with a calm face that hid his danger. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted control over the fear that kept growing inside the group. Mara, the woman with red hair and pale skin, stayed close beside him, her fitted dark coat and practical gear showing that she had come ready for work, not panic. She wanted the truth as much as he did because she had already seen how secrets could destroy careful plans. Jace, the broad man with brown hair and tired eyes, kept one hand on his heavy shield and watched the dark stairs with the patience of a guard who had stayed awake too long. He wanted to keep everyone alive because duty still mattered to him even when the world felt broken. Victor, the pale man with white hair and cold blue eyes, stood a little apart in his silver-trimmed coat and dark gloves, looking like a ruler who had never learned how to look afraid. He wanted the frost relic for reasons he was not saying, and that hidden motive mattered now more than ever. The problem was simple and terrible at the same time. Somewhere below the harbor, a lower seal waited, and if it truly protected something, then that something could not be allowed to wake and spread a continent-wide winter over every city and farm beyond Grey Harbor. Kael had made the choice to stay, and that choice now pulled all of them deeper into danger. The chamber lights flickered again, the ice rings around the relic turned with a soft grinding sound, and the hidden map burned brighter in the cold air, pointing toward a corridor that none of them had seen before. That bright line did not feel like hope. It felt like a warning written by old hands that knew exactly how much ruin they were trying to delay. He moved first because he never stayed still when a path had opened in front of him. He turned toward the corridor beneath the tower, where broken stone steps curled down into darkness and the wall runes glowed in thin blue lines. Mara followed him at once, her sharp face fixed and her breathing slow, because she trusted planning more than luck and knew that fear could not be allowed to steer her steps. Jace came after them, his shield angled forward, ready to block any sudden threat from the shadows. Victor came last, and his quiet certainty made the air feel colder, as if he had already decided how the night would end. They left the main chamber behind and entered a narrow hall where the ceiling hung low and the floor was slick with old rain and frost. The hidden map floated near Kael, burning with blue light and turning its point toward the far end of the corridor, where a carved door stood half buried behind fallen beams. The door was marked with the same seal shape they had seen below the harbor, but this one was split in two, as if something on the other side had pushed against it for years. Jace touched the stone and frowned because the pressure behind it felt wrong, like trapped air held inside a chest that had not opened in ages. Mara leaned close to the runes and read the worn signs with a careful eye, then looked back at the others with a tight jaw. The lower seal was not a simple lock, she said. It was a prison built by keepers who expected betrayal from inside as well as outside. That made the silence after her words much heavier, because everyone in the group knew that betrayal was already walking with them. Victor finally spoke, his voice smooth and quiet, and he said that the keepers were wise to build more than one seal. He claimed the frost relic could not be left alone, because its power did not only freeze water and stone, it could also force hidden things to wake when pressure rose around it. Kael stared at him and asked why Victor knew that much. For the first time, Victor did not answer at once. That small delay mattered because it told the others that he had been waiting for the right moment to reveal a truth he had buried. He said that the relic was not just a weapon. It was a key, and the lower seal was made to keep the key from meeting the lock beneath Grey Harbor. Mara turned toward him sharply, and Jace tightened his grip on the shield. If Victor was telling the truth, then the old keepers had hidden something that even the relic could awaken. If he was lying, then they were already walking into his trap. Before anyone could press him further, the floor gave a deep tremor, and a gust of freezing air rolled through the hall. The carved door shuddered, and thin ice spread across its edges like veins of glass. Kael felt his shadow power stir in response, dark energy curling around his fingers like living smoke. He did not strike yet. He listened instead, because the sound from beyond the door was not a roar or a scream. It was a slow, deep pulse, like something huge turning in its sleep. That pulse changed the whole mood of the room. Now the lower seal no longer felt like an old legend. It felt like a real wall holding back a real force. Mara found the next clue, and it made the danger clearer. She brushed dust from a nearby stone panel and revealed a carved record in simple symbols. The old keepers had feared a person who would one day come for the frost relic, but they had feared something else even more. They had called it the Hollow Crown, a name for the force beneath the harbor that could listen through seals, learn through cracks, and grow stronger each time someone used cold power near it. That was the reason the relic had been split into seals and hidden in pieces of the old city. The keepers had not only trapped the power, they had tried to starve it. If the relic was brought too close to the lower prison, the Hollow Crown might wake and use the relic as a bridge to spread its freezing reach beyond Grey Harbor. Kael understood then why the hidden map kept pulling them downward. It was not showing treasure. It was showing a lock that was already starting to fail. Jace looked at the panel and asked the question the others had been too afraid to ask. If the prison was weakening, who had been feeding it? Victor stepped forward and said that the answer was obvious. People who wanted to control the relic had been near it for years, and every attempt to use its power had fed the thing below. His words were calm, but his eyes were hard, and his meaning was plain. He was speaking about himself as much as anyone else. Mara took a slow breath, then said that his honesty had come too late to be trusted. Victor did not deny it. Instead, he admitted that he had studied the frost relic because he believed the world needed a single strong hand to survive the coming cold. He said that if the relic fell into weak hands, panic would spread, cities would fail, and rulers would fight each other while the storm got worse. He wanted order, and he was willing to risk terrible things to get it. That motive made ugly sense, which was worse than a simple lie. It meant Victor was not mad. He was dangerous because he believed he was right. Kael stepped between Victor and the others, and the shadow around his hand sharpened into a blade shape. He told Victor that control built on fear always breaks in the end. Victor answered that freedom without control always burns itself out. The hall filled with tension so tight that even Jace looked ready to move. Then, from the dark behind the broken beams, a voice called out with a cold laugh. Raven appeared on a high stair landing, her black hair falling around a sharp face and her slim body hidden under a long black coat and tactical armor. She wore a cruel half-smile, and the way she watched the group made it clear she had been tracking them for some time. Raven wanted the relic for herself, not because she cared about order, but because she liked power that belonged to no one else. She said Victor had taken too long, Kael had become too stubborn, and the lower seal was ready to be opened by force. Then she threw a dark spike into the stone, and the corridor behind the group slammed shut with a burst of dust and frost. In one move, she had cut off retreat and made the chamber feel like a cage. The rush that followed was sharp and fast, but it was not a battle of blades alone. Kael sent shadow into the air, and black edges formed around his hand like a storm made solid. Mara moved low and quick, using the narrow hall and broken walls to keep Raven from getting a clean shot. Jace raised his shield and absorbed the first of Raven's strike, the impact driving him back but not down. Victor lifted one gloved hand and sent a ring of cold air across the floor, trying to break the ice floor before Raven could use it. but the move also fed the relic light for one awful second. The frost relic answered with a bright pulse, and every blue rune in the corridor lit at once. That pulse changed everything. The carved door at the end of the hall began to open by itself. Not wide, only enough to show a deep black gap beyond it, but enough for the sound from inside to grow louder. The pulse also made the hidden map split into two bright lines, one pointing at the lower seal and the other pointing deeper still, as if another chamber waited beneath the prison itself. That was the twist none of them had expected. The lower seal was not the final lock. It was a guard over a second, deeper chamber that even the keepers had wanted to bury from memory. Mara saw the change first and shouted that they had been wrong from the start. The relic was not only a key to the prison, it was part of the prison made to answer the thing below when it stirred. Victor went still when he heard that, and for the first time his calm face cracked. He had not known that the seal went lower than this. That meant even his careful plans were built on half-truth. Raven smiled wider because she had just learned that power might be even greater than she hoped. Jace held his ground and ordered everyone back from the opening, but the air pouring through the gap was so cold that it burned their lungs and numbed their fingers. Kael looked into the dark gap and saw faint movement far below, a shape like a crown made of ice and shadow shifting in slow circles. He understood then that the old keepers had not only feared a weapon, they had feared a mind. Something below Grey Harbor was awake enough to listen, and it had now heard the relic answer. Fear could make it for him. He stepped closer to the opening, even as Mara grabbed his arm and told him that they were not ready. He looked at her with steady gray eyes and said that readiness no longer mattered, because the lower seal was already failing and the only chance was to learn the truth before the prison fully opened. That was the change in him. Earlier, he had wanted power and answers, but now he wanted responsibility. He no longer saw the relic as a tool for winning. He saw it as a burden that had to be understood before it could ruin everyone around it. Mara saw that change too, and she let go slowly because she knew he was no longer chasing control for himself. Jace moved to stand beside Kael, shield raised, and said that if the group was going down, then they were going down together. Victor watched them with a cold, thoughtful expression, and it was impossible to tell whether he respected them or resented them. Raven slipped back into the dark, not because she had given up, but because she had seen enough to wait for a better strike. Her cruel smile promised that she would return when the moment was worse for everyone else. The chamber trembled again, and the open crack in the door widened by a few inches. From below came a low pulse and the sound of chains moving in deep water. The lower seal was waking, and with it, the buried thing beneath Grey Harbor was beginning to remember the world above. Kael drew his shadow blade, Mara checked the hidden map one more time, Jace planted his feet, and Victor stared into the opening as if he were measuring the cost of what he had started. Together they stood at the edge of the dark, with one truth now clear between them. The old keepers had not hidden a treasure below the harbor. They had locked away a disaster, and the next step would take all of them into the deepest part of that secret. The storm outside struck the tower with a hard flash of lightning. The relic glowed brighter, and the story moved forward without mercy, pulling them toward the chamber below the seal, where the real danger was finally starting to open its eyes. Violent storm, and every broken roof, leaning tower, and wet stone street seemed to listen as thunder rolled across the dark water. The city had long ago lost its pride, but it still held its secrets under the old stone, where the lower halls of Crown Tower waited with sealed doors and forgotten warnings. Kael stood at the edge of that hidden place with his black hair damp from the storm, his sharp gray eyes fixed on the chamber below, while Mara, with her red hair tied back and her calm but tense face, studied every crack in the floor. Jace, the city guard captain with brown hair and a tired, solid look, kept one hand on his shield and one eye on the tower stairs. Victor, with his white hair, pale face, and cold blue eyes, looked as controlled as ever, even though the frost relic in his hands was glowing brighter with each lightning flash. The central truth was now clear to all of them. The old keepers had not built this place to guard gold or jewels. They had built it to trap something vast, cold, and patient, and if that prison failed, Grey Harbor would fall into endless winter and fear. That was why Victor mattered so much, because he believed the relic could be used to command that buried force instead of awakening it fully, and that belief made him dangerous in a way greed alone never could. Raven, the black-haired hunter in the long dark coat, stood slightly apart with a cruel half-smile, waiting to see who would break first. She wanted the strongest side to win because strength was the only thing she trusted. Then the floor answered the storm with a low, hollow sound, and the hidden chamber below the seal began to open. The center of the tower floor turned slowly, as if some buried hand had found its grip from below. Cold air spilled up through the gap, carrying a pale mist that touched the boots of the team and made everyone step back at once. Mara lifted her lantern and saw runes carved into the inner wall, old and worn, but still clear enough to read in pieces. She did not speak at first, because the meaning was too serious to say too fast. These were keeper marks, warnings written for people who had already accepted that one mistake could drown the city in ice. Jace leaned closer and saw a symbol he knew from old guard records, a seal sign used for dangerous holds and emergency walls. His face tightened because he understood now that the city had been living on top of a prison for generations without knowing it. Kael felt the relic in Victor's hands pull toward the opening, like a compass drawn to a hidden magnet. At the same time, a cold pressure moved through the chamber, not wind, not sound, but a deep listening force that seemed to notice every breath. That was the hollow crown, the unseen ancient power buried beneath Grey Harbor, and it was not fully awake yet, but it had heard the relic glowing above it. Victor noticed the same pull, and his mouth curved into a small, sure smile. He said the city had always needed a ruler who could control what others feared. He said the keepers were cowards who hid power instead of using it. He said he would go down into the chamber, claim the truth, and bend the buried force before it could break free on its own. He spoke with quiet certainty, and that made him more frightening than a man who shouted. Mara heard the trap in his logic at once. If the hollow crown could be controlled, then Victor could turn the whole city into a weapon and make every guard, merchant, and noble obey him out of fear. If he failed, the chamber would break open and the cold below would spread through the harbor and beyond. Either way, he was willing to risk everyone else. Jace stepped in front of the opening and told Victor to stop. Raven only watched, her sharp eyes measuring the distance between loyalty and survival, while the storm kept hammering the tower above them. But he did raise the frost relic. The glowing crystal core, wrapped in floating ice rings and blue runes, burned pale and cold in his gloved hand, and the mist around it thickened until the chamber felt like a winter cellar. He claimed the relic had chosen him because he could think clearly while others panicked. He said the keepers had made a mistake by locking away power that strong, and he would correct that mistake. Then he stepped onto the turning stone ring, and the chamber below answered with a deep pulse that made the tower beams shiver overhead. Kael felt the shadow in his own blood stir, ready to become blades if he called it. He also felt the storm currents around his hands gathering in restless circles, pulled by the relic and the cold beneath. But he did not strike yet because he had learned something important since the first part of this journey. Power used too early could destroy the very thing it meant to save. Mara moved to Kael's side and whispered that the Keeper runes were a warning map, not just a lock. She had found one line hidden under the dust, and it said the seal could only stay strong if the relic remained far from the chamber below. That was the twist that changed everything. The frost relic was not the key to opening the prison, it was the key that made the prison weak. Victor had been wrong from the start, and if he used it here, he would not control the hollow crown. He would feed it. The realization hit Jace like a hard blow. He had been ready to arrest Victor, but now he understood that this was bigger than a criminal act. It was a choice between one dangerous man and a citywide disaster. Raven heard the truth as well, and for the first time her cruel smile faded. Even she did not want to stand in a place where winter itself might rise up and swallow the roof above her. Wider with a grinding groan, and a staircase of black steps appeared beneath it, leading down into cold darkness. The air from below carried the smell of old salt, frozen stone, and something faintly metallic, like the edge of a storm before lightning. Kael looked at Mara, and Mara looked back at him with steady red hair and a face that said she was already planning 3 moves ahead. She had changed during this journey because she had begun as the planner who trusted only careful steps, but now she was willing to trust Kael with the most dangerous decision. Jace tightened his grip on his shield and chose duty over fear, even though his face showed how heavy that choice felt. He moved to guard the others from the tower entrance because if the seal broke, the storm above might send more danger spilling down the stairs. Victor, however, had already gone too far to step back. He lowered one hand toward the stairwell and let the relic shine brighter, trying to force the power below to rise and answer him. The chamber reacted at once. Blue light flashed across the carved walls. The floor trembled, A deep sound rolled up from below, not a voice but a vast and sleeping pressure noticing the relic in its reach. The Hollow Crown had begun to listen more closely. Then Raven made her own move. She had never promised loyalty to Victor, only usefulness, and now she saw that his plan would likely leave everyone trapped or broken. With a swift motion, she kicked a loose iron brace into his path and forced him to stumble one step away from the stair edge. It was not a final betrayal, but it was enough to show that she had chosen caution over blind ambition. Victor recovered fast, his cold blue eyes burning with anger for the first time. He snapped that she had made a mistake, but the shaking floor answered for her. Kael finally acted. He called shadow into narrow living blades along the stair rail, while storm current flashed around his hands in sharp white arcs. He did not unleash everything. He only used enough to block Victor and hold the chamber steady for one more breath. The clash was not about blood or ruin. It was about control, timing, and the right to decide what would wake below. Jace stepped forward with his shield raised, helping Kael hold the line. Mara reached the keeper panel on the wall and pressed her hand against the carved symbol she had decoded. A hidden mechanism clicked somewhere deep inside the stone. The staircase stopped shaking. A second seal, older than the first, began to rise from below. That meant the keepers had expected this moment, and they had left one more barrier behind in case the first failed. Closed completely. It only slowed the pull from below, and that tiny delay was enough to change the shape of the moment. Kael stared down the dark stairs and saw, for the first time, a faint blue glow moving far beneath the chamber floor. It was not the relic light, it was something else, something that seemed to circle and breathe inside the blackness. Mara whispered that the old keepers must have built a layered prison because they feared even their own locks could fail. Jace asked the question everyone was thinking. If the Hollow Crown was still trapped, why did it feel so awake? The answer came from the cold mist itself. The chamber was not waking the prison completely. It was waking a watcher inside the prison, something that had been listening through cracks for years and had now sensed a way out. Victor understood that too late. For a brief moment, his control slipped, and he looked less like a ruler and more like a man standing at the edge of a mistake he could no longer name. He did not surrender, but he did stop pushing forward. That was important, because even he could feel the pressure below growing faster than his pride. Kael stepped beside Mara and made a choice that changed him. He did not reach for the stairwell with rage, he reached for it with trust. He told Mara to stay on the seal panel, Jace to guard the upper door, and Raven to keep Victor back if he tried anything foolish. Then Kael looked down into the dark and understood the true test. He would have to enter the lower chamber soon, but not yet and not alone. The storm outside cracked the tower again, the relic gave one hard pulse of blue light, and the hidden shape below answered with a slow, patient movement that sent cold through every stone around them. The danger had not broken free, it had only opened one eye. And as the team stood above that watching dark, the next step became clear to all of them at once. They would have to go deeper, work together, and face whatever the old keepers had buried before the Hollow Crown learned how to climb. Hard sky, where rain moved sideways and lightning flashed between broken towers. The ruined coastal city looked tired and cold, with wet stone streets, broken bridges, and dark windows that stared out like empty eyes. Inside Crown Tower, the air felt even heavier because the tower had become a wound in the city, and the wound had just begun to open. Kael stood near the cracked floor with a calm face and sharp gray eyes, his black hair damp from the storm, his dark hood pulled low, and his lean body ready to move fast. Mara, a woman with red hair and a focused face, stayed close to the relic with careful hands and a tight jaw, because she was the one who understood the old seals better than anyone. Jace, a broad man with brown hair and a guard captain uniform scratched by old battles, held his heavy shield with both hands and watched the stairwell like a man who knew the next mistake could cost the whole city. Victor, a white-haired man with pale skin and cold blue eyes, stood with quiet pride in his silver-trimmed coat, looking less worried than the others, because he believed every problem could be controlled if the right person held the right power. Raven, a slim woman with black hair and a cruel half-smile, kept to the shadow near a broken pillar, her sharp eyes always moving, because she trusted only her own advantage. The frost relic hovered between them, glowing like a blue heart wrapped in floating ice rings, and every slow pulse from it made the cold below answer with patient force. That was the real danger. The thing under the tower was not free yet, but it was awake now, and if it learned how to rise through the cracks, Grey Harbor could be locked in a season of endless frost. Kael understood that first, and when he looked at the dark opening in the floor, he knew the team had no safe choice left. They had to go down. Cracked stones and pressed her palm to the floor, feeling the ancient runes hidden under the dust. Her red hair clung to her cheek, and her voice stayed low and steady as she explained what had happened long ago. The keepers of Grey Harbor had built the tower above a sealed chamber, not to hide treasure, but to hold pressure in place. The hollow crown was not a normal creature, and it was not a simple curse either. It was an ancient force that listened through cracks, followed cold, and grew stronger whenever the frost relic came near it. That was why the seals had been made in layers, with rune locks, stone rings, and watch points spread through the old city. If one seal failed, the next would strain. If too many failed, the buried force could spread through every wet wall and empty street. Jace listened with a hard face, and he asked the question that mattered most. He wanted to know why the old keepers had not destroyed the relic and ended the risk long ago. Mara looked at the blue light, then at Victor, and she answered that the relic could not be destroyed without breaking the seal logic around it. The keepers had chosen a harder path. They had hidden the relic, used it as a counterweight, and warned that only a living bearer could guide it without waking the hollow crown too fast. Kael felt the words land like a stone in his chest, because it meant the burden had been passed from one generation to the next, and now the burden was in his hands. Victor said little, but his cold blue eyes showed that he had already made his own judgment. He wanted control, not caution. He believed the city would fall if the relic stayed in the hands of uncertain people. He believed he should be the one to carry it, and he did not hide that belief anymore. And a deep sound rolled up from below like a slow breath. Dust fell from the beams overhead. The blue glow of the frost relic flickered once, and the hidden shape beneath the floor moved with more force than before. It was still not free, but it was testing the chain that held it. Kael reacted first. He lifted one hand, and shadow gathered around his fingers in thin, sharp shapes that looked like dark blades made from storm light. At the same time, wind snapped around his wrist, and the air trembled with violent force. Mara stepped back and pulled a thin iron key from her belt, then slid it into one of the old rune slots hidden in the stone. Jace planted his shield near the crack and braced his feet, ready to hold the others if the floor gave way. Raven watched all of this with narrowed eyes, and for one tense moment it looked like she might strike first and take the relic for herself. Instead, she moved to the far side of the chamber and studied the wall, because even Raven could feel that the thing below them was bigger than her pride. Victor walked toward the relic with a controlled pace, and his voice stayed calm when he said the truth no one wanted to hear. He believed the team was wasting time arguing while the danger grew. He said the relic had chosen a bearer before, but choice was not enough. The city needed someone strong enough to command the relic before the hollow crown used their fear against them. Kael did not trust him, and Mara did not either, but the chamber gave them no time to argue. A new crack opened in the floor, cold mist rose through it, and a wave of pressure pushed against their legs like a living hand. Jace nearly lost his footing, and only Kael grabbing his arm kept him from sliding toward the opening. That small act mattered because Jace saw it clearly. Kael was not fighting for power, he was fighting for people. Into the tower by a narrow stone stair that curved under the chamber. The steps were wet, old, and broken in places, so every one of them had to work with care. Mara led the way with a lantern covered in blue glass, and her red hair flashed each time lightning crossed the slats above. The lower level was wider than expected, with sealed archways, collapsed beams, and rune marks cut into the walls in long lines. Some marks were scratched out, while others still glowed faintly under the relic light. That was the second surprise. The keepers had not only trapped the hollow crown, they had tried to teach the city how to remember it. On one wall, Mara found a full warning carved by hand, and she read it aloud in a careful voice. The message said the hollow crown would listen for fear, hunger, and greed, then use those cracks to push upward. It also said the relic must never be placed in one person's hands for too long, because the force below would learn that mind, then follow that mind like a path through snow. That warning changed the room. Jace looked at Victor. Raven looked at Kael. Mara looked at everyone. Suddenly the real problem was clear. The threat below was not just ancient power, it was a force that could use their own flaws against them. Victor noticed the shift and his jaw tightened, but he did not retreat. Instead, he admitted something that made the others go still. He said the reason he had pushed so hard was not only for control. He had once seen the first signs of the hollow crown in another harbor far from here, years ago, and he had watched good people ignore it until the cold spread too far. He would not make the same mistake again, even if it meant taking hard actions that others would hate. That was not a gentle motive, but it was a real one. He was afraid of failure, and that fear made him dangerous. But the tower gave a deeper groan, and the wall ahead split open just enough to reveal a black chamber below. Cold poured out in a thick wave, and in that cold the team felt something listening. Kael stepped forward and sent a thin shadow blade into the crack, not to attack, but to test the shape of the space below. The blade came back shredded into smoke, and Kael knew at once that the hollow crown had grown stronger since the last pulse. Mara took a sharp breath and moved to the wall controls, where old stone rings could still be turned by hand. Jace covered her, shield raised, while Raven slipped to the side and watched the darkness with a hunter's stillness. Victor reached for the relic, but Kael caught his wrist before he could take it. Their eyes locked in the blue glow, and the tension between them burned like a wire about to snap. Kael told him in plain words that control without trust would only wake the thing below faster. Victor answered that trust without strength would let the whole coast freeze. For a heartbeat, both men seemed right, and that was what made the moment so dangerous. Then Mara shouted from the wall because she had found the next seal ring, and it was not fully broken yet. It was waiting for a key. She turned to Kael and said the relic itself was the key, but it needed a bearer who could hold its pulse without letting the hollow crown read the fear inside. Kael understood what she meant, and the burden settled on him again. He had to carry the relic deeper, not as a prize, but as a warning signal. If he failed, the buried force would climb. If he succeeded, they might find the next seal chamber and delay the full rise. He took the frost relic into both hands, and the cold hit him like a strike of winter wind. Blue light wrapped around his gloves, the floating ice rings spun faster, and every stone in the tower seemed to lean toward him. Down below, the dark shape answered at once, slow and patient, as if it had been waiting for his choice all along. Kael did not step back. He lifted his chin, looked at his team, and led them toward the open chamber below, where the next seal waited and the hollow crown listened in the dark. The open chamber below the tower looked like the mouth of a buried giant, with cracked stone walls, broken steps, and hanging beams that swayed in the cold air. Grey Harbor thundered far above them, but down here the sound came in dull waves, as if the city itself had been wrapped in thick cloth. Kael led the way with the frost relic held tight in both hands, and the blue light from it washed over his black hair, his sharp gray eyes, and the dark hood of his coat. Mara followed close behind him, a woman with red hair, a focused face, and the calm, careful posture of someone who always counted exits first. Jace came next, a broad man with brown hair, tired eyes, and the heavy shield of a city guard captain held ready in front of him. Raven moved in the rear, a slim woman with black hair, sharp eyes, and a cruel half-smile that never fully left her face, because she trusted blades more than people. Together, they all understood the danger now, because the central problem was simple and terrible. If the final seal opened the wrong way, the hollow crown beneath Grey Harbor would wake fully, and the cold pressure inside the tower would spread into the sea, the streets, and every home in the city. His bones as he stepped down into the chamber. The frost relic was still in his hands, and the floating ice rings around it spun faster every time he moved. The pale light touched the ancient runes in the floor, and the runes began to answer with a slow pulse like a distant heart. Mara watched them with narrowed eyes and said the danger was not only the cold, but the pattern of the seals. She was the team planner, the one who studied every mark and every door, and she had spent weeks learning that the tower was not built to protect the relic alone. It was built to hold something down. Jace, who had spent his life guarding the city streets and the broken upper districts, said the people above would never forgive them if they failed. He wanted order, safety, and a way to keep Grey Harbor from falling into panic. Raven only smiled at that because she had come for a darker reason. She had been hired to find Victor, and she wanted to see if the man behind the silver-trimmed coat was as untouchable as he seemed. Yet even she could feel that the chamber had changed the moment Kael took the relic, because the dark shape below the floor had answered at once, slow and patient, as if it had been waiting for his choice all along. Then Victor appeared at the far side of the chamber, stepping from behind a broken pillar as if he had always belonged there. He was a man with white hair, pale skin, and cold blue eyes, wearing an expensive silver-trimmed coat and clean layered clothing that made him look like a ruler rather than a thief. He carried himself with quiet certainty, and his voice was calm when he said the same thing he had been saying since the first seal: the hollow crown was never meant to stay buried. Victor believed the ancient force under Grey Harbor could be shaped, bound, and used to create a new order, one where fear would keep chaos out and the strong would rule without question. He wanted the Frost Relic because it was the key that matched the sleeping lock beneath the city. The cold magic of the relic could force the final seal open, but Victor knew the risk and accepted it anyway, because he believed the cost of control was worth more than the cost of freedom. That was the truth behind his motive, and it made him more dangerous than a madman because he was not blind. He simply did not care who got hurt if the result made him powerful. He raised one gloved hand toward the floor and the ancient stone shuddered, while dark pressure rolled through the chamber like a warning breath from below. He lowered the relic a little, and shadow gathered along his forearms in thin, sharp lines. The darkness of his power folded into living blades, while storm currents snapped around his hands and cracked through the cold air. Mara shouted for everyone to move left because she saw the seal plates shifting under the floor, and Jace slammed his shield down just as a wave of freezing force burst up from a split in the stone. The clash was not a battle of blood or ruin, but it was violent enough to shake dust from the beams and force everyone to brace hard against the wall. Raven darted forward with terrifying speed, aiming not at Kael, but at Victor, because she realized the white-haired man had planned to use both teams as fuel. He had drawn them here to distract each other while he opened the seal from the far side. That was the twist that changed everything, because it was no longer clear whether Victor wanted the relic for the Hollow Crown alone, or whether he wanted Kael to blame the city guards, blame Raven, and then break the seal himself out of desperation. Jace saw it too, and for the first time he and Raven moved in the same direction, forcing Victor back from the broken pillar while Mara rushed to the center runes and read them aloud in a steady voice, one symbol at a time, because she understood the chamber enough to know that the final seal needed three things at once: the relic, a willing hand, and a promise that the cold would be contained. Kael heard that and felt the weight of it. He was the one holding the relic, so the chamber was asking him for a choice, not just strength. His calm expression did not change, but inside he remembered every step that had brought them into Grey Harbor, every lie told by men who wanted power, and every friend who had stood beside him when the tower tried to break them. The Hollow Crown listened through the cracks, and the deeper pressure below the floor began to rise, slow and endless, like a vast thing turning in its sleep. Blue light wrapped tighter around Kael, and the ice rings around the relic spun so fast they became a pale circle. Mara looked up at him, red hair falling across her face, and told him the truth of the seal as she understood it. The ancient builders had not only trapped the Hollow Crown. They had linked it to the Frost Relic so that anyone greedy enough to use the relic would have to reveal their intent first. If the user wanted conquest, the seal would break wide. If the user wanted restraint, the chamber might hold. That was why Victor had waited and pushed and lied. He knew his own desire would damage the lock, but he believed he could force it anyway. Kael finally understood why the relic had struck him like winter wind in the moment he picked it up. It was testing him. He threw both hands forward, and the chamber filled with a hard blast of cold pressure that drove Jace to one knee and sent Raven sliding across the stone. Mara clung to the rune circle and kept reading, even as the symbols flared too bright to look at for long. Kael stepped into the blast, and his shadow blades cut through the cold like black glass, while storm currents roared around his arms and pushed the force back toward Victor. The two powers crashed together in the middle of the chamber, and the floor split in thin lines of frost and shadow. For a breath, Victor almost won because his will was strong and his hate was focused. Then Jace rose behind Kael, braced his shield into the stone, and pushed the line of the blast just enough for Raven to strike Victor off balance with a fast, hard hit to the shoulder. She did not trust Kael, but she hated being used more than she hated him. That small choice changed the fight. Victor staggered back, and Kael saw the opening. He looked down at the relic, then at Mara, then at the dark floor beneath them all, and he made the hardest choice he had faced so far. He did not force the seal open for power. He fed the relic into the rune circle with both hands steady, then spoke a simple promise that he would not let the cold escape if the tower accepted him. The chamber went silent for one terrible second, and the Hollow Crown listened. Not a scream, but a massive pressure shift that rolled under the chamber and up into the tower above. The frost relic flashed brighter, the floating ice rings widened, and the blue runes along the floor connected one by one, as if a hidden map had finally found its last line. Victor stared in shock because he understood too late that Kael had not broken the rules of the seal. He had followed the truest one. The relic needed a keeper, not a conqueror. The hollow crown did not rise, but it did move, and that movement shoved the air through the chamber with enough force to crack two old support beams and send loose stones skittering across the floor. Jace grabbed Mara and pulled her clear before a beam fell, while Raven leaped back into the shadow of the wall and watched the floor with narrowed eyes. Kael held his ground in the center of the circle, his black hair blown back by the cold wind, and his gray eyes fixed on the bright lines racing beneath his feet. He felt the hidden presence below the city, still awake now but held in place for one more moment. That was the victory, and it was not complete. The seal had not ended the threat. It had only pushed it deeper. Victor, driven back and furious, vanished through a side passage with the last of his dignity still clinging to him, promising that he would return with another plan. Mara warned that he had learned something useful from the chamber. Jace said the city above had only minutes before the shock reached the lower streets. Raven said the tower had now shown its teeth. Kael listened to them all, then looked into the dark stairway that led even lower, because he now understood the truth that mattered most. The hollow crown was not the final enemy, but the locked heart of a much larger prison, and whatever lay under Grey Harbor had already begun to wake in response to his promise. So the team moved again, not as strangers and not as perfect allies, but as people who had seen the same truth from different sides. Mara stayed close to the ruins, still reading the tower like a living map. Jace took the front with his shield raised, because his duty had changed from guarding the city to guarding the people standing beside him. Raven slipped between broken columns and checked the edges of the chamber, no longer smiling, because she had learned that even a skilled hunter could be hunted by hidden power. Kael led them toward the next stairwell, and the cold followed like a silent animal. Above them, Grey Harbor groaned under thunder and wind, while below them the hollow crown kept listening through the cracks, patient and cold and far from finished. Kael did not fear it anymore in the same way he had before. He now knew the relic was not only a weapon, it was a promise, and promises could be kept. That change settled inside him as they descended, and though the path ahead was still dark, the team now had one shared goal, one shared danger, and one clear reason to keep going. If they could reach the next seal before Victor returned, they might still save Grey Harbor from becoming a frozen grave for everyone who lived above the sea. Grey Harbor lay under heavy storm clouds, and the ruined city looked like it had been cut apart by old war and bad luck. Wet streets shined under broken lantern light, narrow alleys twisted between leaning stone walls, and the upper skybridges hung above the lower districts like cracked bones. Deep below all of it, the next seal waited inside the shattered crown tower, and everyone in the team understood the same hard truth now. If they failed before Victor returned, the frost relic could turn the whole coastal city into a frozen grave, and every person above the sea would be trapped inside that cold forever. Kael walked first through the dark passage, with his black hair damp from the dripping stone and his sharp gray eyes fixed ahead. He was a lean man with fast feet, a dark hooded coat, layered leather armor, fingerless gloves, and boots made for sudden movement. He had once treated the relic like a weapon to be used, but that had changed in the last part of the journey, and the change now showed in his face. He no longer reached for the frost relic with fear or hunger alone. He carried it like a promise, because he now understood that power meant nothing unless he used it to protect others. Mara followed close behind him, and she was a woman with red hair, pale skin, and a sharp, focused face that never wasted a moment. Her fitted dark long coat moved with each careful step, and her high collar, utility belts, slim gloves, and practical boots made her look ready for any trap. She wanted the city saved, but she also wanted the team to survive long enough to see that hope become real. Jace brought up the rear, and he was a man with brown hair, weathered skin, and a broad, strong build. He wore a city guard captain uniform with dark armor plates, a heavy shield, and reinforced boots, and though fatigue lined his serious face, duty still kept him standing. He had spent days trying to keep Grey Harbor from falling apart, and now he needed these outsiders because his own city could not hold much longer on its own. Raven moved above them on the broken side beams, and she remained a dangerous woman with black hair, sharp eyes, a long black coat, fitted tactical armor, dark gloves, and high boots. Her cruel half-smile never truly left her face because she enjoyed pressure and feared nothing that could be hunted. She had once served Victor by choice, but now she served him because he knew how to reward strength and punish failure. She wanted the next seal for Victor because she believed control was better than collapse, and she believed the weak deserved to be ruled before they were destroyed by chaos. That belief made her cruel, but it also made her easy to understand. She did not want mercy. She wanted a world where only the strong made the rules. Victor was not with them in the tunnel, but his presence still felt close. He was a man with white hair, pale skin, and cold blue eyes, dressed in an expensive silver-trimmed coat, dark formal gloves, tall boots, and clean layered clothing that made him look calm even when he was dangerous. He had come to Grey Harbor for one reason only: he wanted the Frost Relic and the buried hollow crown beneath the city, because he believed the ancient force could be controlled if he reached all the seals first. Victor was not trying to freeze the world by accident. He wanted the cold because he thought fear would make people obey and obedience would make his rule permanent. He had studied the seals long before this descent began, and he knew each seal was a lock on a pressure point below the city. He also knew the terrible rule that tied them together. Every time the Frost Relic was pushed too hard near a seal, the hollow crown below listened, woke a little more, and pressed back against the world above. Victor did not care because he believed he could be the only person smart enough to hold that force without breaking. The team reached a wide landing where old stone arches crossed above a deep stairwell, and the air felt colder there, as if the tower itself were breathing through cracks in the walls. The Frost Relic hung in Kael's hand as a glowing crystal core wrapped in floating ice rings and blue runes, and its pale light made the broken floor shine with thin frost. Mara stopped and studied the walls, then pointed to a line of ancient marks that ran into a sealed door below the landing. Jace stepped up beside her and ran one gloved hand over the stone, and his face tightened when he saw the pressure cracks around the frame. He knew guard records, harbor maps, and old stories from his own family, and he understood what the marks meant. This was not only a doorway, this was a warning. "The next seal is behind that door," Jace said, his voice low and steady, "but the tower is not holding it alone anymore." Mara looked at him, then at Kael, and she did not pretend to be calm. "You mean the hollow crown is pushing back?" Jace nodded once. "Yes, and if the relic is forced through without care, the whole chamber could lock down or collapse." Kael felt the relic hum in his hand, and the cold ran up his arm like a living warning. He remembered the fear he had felt before, and he also remembered the promise he had made to himself. He would not use the relic just to win, he would use it to keep people alive. That difference changed how he stood, how he breathed, and how he looked at the sealed door. He was still afraid, but his fear no longer ruled him. It had become part of the promise instead. Raven dropped from the beam above them and landed without sound on the stair below. Her black coat moved once, then settled, and her sharp eyes cut across the team like a blade. "Victor is close," she said. "He sent me ahead because he wanted the seal ready when he arrived." Mara lifted her chin. "You are telling us this because you betrayed him, or because you want something from us?" Raven smiled without warmth. "I am telling you because Victor does not share power. When he reaches the next seal, he will use it to command the hollow crown, and then no one in Grey Harbor will be free." That was the first true twist, and it landed hard. Victor had not been trying to break the city only for open destruction. He wanted to rule what came after the freezing because he believed fear would make a perfect kingdom. The others had thought he wanted simple power. Now they saw something colder. He wanted a world where the city survived only by obeying him. The door shuddered before anyone touched it, and a deep throb rolled through the floor. Dust fell from the arch above them. The hollow crown had heard the relic again. Kael felt the pressure rise, not in the room alone, but from beneath the city, as if a giant sleeping thing had turned its head toward their light. The seal was not just a lock, it was a restraint. If it broke, the buried force would flood the upper city with endless cold and crush every bridge, alley, and tower under the weight of it. Jace raised his shield and planted his boots. Mara pulled two small tools from her belt and moved to the side of the frame. Raven watched both of them, ready to strike if she saw a weakness, but even she looked troubled by the sound of the tower groaning. "Kael," Mara said without looking away from the door, "you can feel the relic better than anyone now. Guide the cold, do not push it." He answered with a single nod, then closed his fingers around the Frost Relic. The icy rings around the core spun faster, and blue light spread across his gloves and up his sleeves. He did not force it like before. He listened to it. He pictured the promise he had made, not as a lie, but as a path. Then he reached out with that calm new focus, and the relic answered. A narrow stream of pale frost moved across the seal marks, not as a blast, but as a careful line that traced the old runes. Mara watched the symbols brighten one by one, and her sharp face changed from tension to careful hope. Jace leaned in and braced the door frame when the stones started to shift. Raven stepped back at the same time because even she could tell this was working, and she did not trust surprises when ancient power was nearby. The seal opened with a long, heavy scrape, and cold air poured from the chamber beyond. Inside was a round room built beneath Crown Tower, with broken stairs circling a pit in the center and ancient runes carved into the lower walls. A pillar of ice stood over the pit, and inside the ice rested a dark metal ring shaped like a crown band with missing points. The moment Kael saw it, he understood that this was not a prize. It was one piece of a larger lock, and the lock had been made to hold something that never wanted peace. The hollow crown was not a person or a ghost. It was an old force buried below Grey Harbor, tied to cold, seals, and hidden pressure. It listened through cracks, and every use of the frost relic gave it more strength. That was why Victor kept moving from seal to seal. He believed he could gather enough control to command the force before it fully woke. And a second sound rolled in from the upper stairs, sharp boots on broken stone, and every person in the room turned at once. Victor had arrived sooner than expected. His white hair showed first through the dark stairwell, then his silver-trimmed coat, then the calm shape of his gloved hands as he looked down into the chamber like a king inspecting a throne room. Behind him came a small line of masked followers, and with them came the cold wind that always seemed to follow his steps. He stopped at the top of the stairs and smiled with quiet certainty, as if the room had already chosen him. "Excellent," Victor said. "You open the seal for me." Kael rose slowly, the relic glowing brighter in his hand. "You are too late." Victor looked at him with those blue eyes that never seemed to blink with doubt. "No, Kael, I am exactly on time. You have learned to carry the relic like a promise, and that is useful. Promises can be broken, or they can be claimed." Mara moved half a step in front of Kael, and Jace lifted his shield into a ready wall. Raven stayed to Victor's side, but even she did not look fully certain anymore because the chamber had changed since she entered. The pressure from below had grown stronger, and the runes along the wall now pulsed in a slow, uneasy rhythm. The hollow crown was awake enough to notice every voice in the room. Kael felt that truth deep in his bones, and he understood one final thing. Victor was not only racing them for power, he was racing the awakening itself, because if the crown force fully surfaced before he could bind it, then even he would lose control. That knowledge did not make Kael smaller, it made him steadier. He looked at Mara, at Jace, and even at Raven, and he saw that each of them had come to the same edge in different ways. Mara wanted to save the city through planning. Jace wanted to save it through duty. Raven wanted to survive by choosing the stronger side. Victor wanted to rule the ruin, and Kael wanted, for the first time, to keep a promise larger than fear. He stepped forward into the cold light of the chamber, lifted the frost relic, and spoke with a calm voice that carried farther than he expected. "If this seal must be held, then we hold it together." The words changed the room. Jace planted his shield beside Kael. Mara reached for the rune tools and began to read the wall. Even Raven hesitated because she had not expected the offer to include her. Victor, still smiling, only raised one hand and let the cold gather around his glove. The chamber shivered, the stairs shook, and the next battle began with the old tower itself groaning beneath both the relic and the seal. Above them, Grey Harbor waited under the storm, unaware of how close it stood to either salvation or ruin, and deep below, the hollow crown listened harder than ever, ready for whatever choice came next. Grey Harbor still crouched under the storm, and Crown Tower still shook like a broken tooth above the water. Inside the dark chamber, Kael stood near the frozen relic. Mara watched every stair, Jace held the cracked shield line, and Raven kept her slim body angled toward escape. Victor stood calm in his silver-trimmed coat, and his goal was simple and terrible. He wanted the frost relic to wake the hollow crown, freeze the harbor, and make every witness kneel forever. Victor moved first, and the cold poured from his glove in a white wave. Kael answered with shadow blades that snapped through the air, while storm power crackled around his hands and pushed the frost back. Mara read the broken room like a map, then shouted for Jace to guard the lower seal, because the ancient runes were starting to flicker. The tower groaned harder, the stairs split, and each of power made the chamber feel smaller and more desperate. Raven finally made her choice, and it shocked everyone. She had expected Victor to trust only himself, but he had offered her no real future, only a colder prison with a prettier name. She turned on him with a sharp laugh, cut across his opening path, and forced his next strike wide. Victor did not lose his calm because his plan had always included betrayal. He used Raven to pull Kael closer to the relic, hoping the Storm Warrior would trigger the seal and finish the awakening for him. That was the twist, and Mara saw it first. The hollow crown was not just buried under Grey Harbor. It was a living pressure that listened through cracks, grew stronger when fear spread, and fed on the relic anytime someone tried to claim it with greed. Victor had never wanted to wear the crown. He wanted to command it from above, then use its cold to trap the whole coast in obedient silence. Kael understood the truth at last, and he changed with it. He stopped fighting like a hunter and started fighting like a protector. He drove his storm power into the relic not to steal it, but to overload its pull and close the seal instead of breaking it. Jace held the lower stairs until Mara reached the runes and reset them by hand, while Raven turned her blades on Victor and pushed him back step by step. At the final moment, the relic dimmed, the hollow crown went still, and Victor was forced to retreat into the storm. When dawn touched Grey Harbor, the tower still stood, the city still breathed, and Kael no longer fought for victory alone. He fought for everyone who could not afford to lose.